You're listening to Audiology. Support this channel by becoming a member and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. When Austria, under Habsburg control, declared war on France on March 12, 1799, France was thrown into a state of emergency, leading to the pro-war Jacobin group gaining power after the April elections. Meanwhile, Napoleon and France's top army were caught up in the campaign in Egypt and Syria, leaving France vulnerable to defeats in the early months of 1799. By June 18th, a significant political shake-up known as the Coup of the 30th of Prairial Year 7 took place, removing the Jacobins from power and making Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, one of the leaders of the government's five-man directory, the key figure in control. France saw better days after winning the Second Battle of Zurich, and with the threat of invasion fading, the Jacobins worried that pro-peace royalists might regain strength. However, Napoleon's return to France on October 9th was seen as a turning point, with people from various political factions celebrating him as the hero the country needed. The public was captivated by Napoleon's achievements in the Middle East, and Sieyès saw in him the perfect military leader for his own plans to further secure his power through a coup. Yet Napoleon had his sights set on a bigger prize, secretly planning to take control himself. With the army as a crucial factor, Napoleon had to navigate carefully around generals with different loyalties. Some were staunch Republicans, while others, eyeing power, thought they were better suited to lead France. Despite these challenges, Napoleon managed to keep his true ambitions under wraps. The strategy for the coup was to first convince the current government leaders to step down. Following that, the plan was to have the legislative bodies, the Council of Ancients and the Council of 500, set up a new commission that would create a constitution aligning with what the coup leaders wanted, all while troops were strategically positioned around Paris for support. On the morning of November 9th, 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte tricked the government councils into believing that a dangerous coup by radical Jacobins was about to happen in Paris. He convinced them to move to the safer Château de Saint-Cloud in the suburbs for their own protection. At this time, Napoleon Bonaparte was tasked with ensuring the safety of these councils and was given control over all the local military forces available. That same morning, two of the government's directors, Sieyès and Roger Ducos, stepped down from their positions. Then Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Périgord, who was the recently resigned Minister of Foreign Affairs and a key supporter of Napoleon, pressured another director, Paul Barras, into resigning as well. This resulted in 3 out of the 5 directors resigning on the very first day of the coup, which essentially left the governing directory powerless because they did not have enough members to make official decisions. However, the 2 remaining directors, Louis-Jérôme Goyer and Jean-François Auguste Moulin, who were both Jacobins, kept protesting strongly against what was happening. They were arrested the next day by General Jean-Victor Marie Moreau, who was working with Napoleon. By the day after their arrest, both had been forced to give up. While all this was happening, the 2 councils, which the directors were part of, were not scared off. They kept on meeting and discussing matters, showing they were not as easily intimidated as the directory had been. By the next day, the deputies had mostly figured out that they were not being shielded from a Jacobin rebellion, but were actually in the midst of an attempted coup. With their refusal to comply, Napoleon made a dramatic entrance into the chambers with a group of grenadiers. This action marked a turning point. What started as a political maneuver had now turned into a military operation. When Napoleon confronted the ancients, despite showcasing a significant military presence, they were not easily swayed. He faced resistance and was heckled as he tried to convince them with points like, "The Republic has no government," and "The revolution is over," highlighting the dire state of affairs. When challenged about the Constitution, Napoleon responded sharply, reminding them of their own previous breaches, essentially saying, "You talk about the Constitution? You have destroyed it yourselves through your actions on various dates," accusing them of hypocrisy and undermining the very Constitution they now sought to defend. Napoleon's encounter with the Council of 500 was even more unfriendly. As he entered, a debate was raging over the validity of Barras's resignation, and the atmosphere was charged. Napoleon was physically confronted, and some reports suggest he nearly passed out from the confrontation. It was not Napoleon, but his brother Lucien, the council's president, who called the grenadiers to defend Napoleon. Amidst this chaos, Napoleon was nearly declared an outlaw by the council. Lucien managed to convince the soldiers outside by pointing to Napoleon's injured, pale face, which may have been self-inflicted in a moment of distress. Lucien dramatically threatened to kill Napoleon himself if he were found to be a traitor, and then ordered the soldiers to remove the hostile deputies. This command led to General Joachim Murat and his grenadiers storming the council, effectively dissolving the directory's power. Following this, The ancients issued a decree that paused the councils for 3 months, named Napoleon, CIS, and Ducos as provisional consuls, and established the corps legislatif. They rounded up some cooperative members from the 500 to lend legitimacy to these changes. And, just like that, the Directory and the councils were history. After the opposition was defeated, the team behind the coup set up 2 groups, each made up of 25 members from the 2 main councils, who were then pressured into establishing a temporary government. This new government was the beginning of the consulate, with Napoleon, CIS, and Ducos serving as its first consuls. The lack of protest from the public showed that the revolution had come to an end. The 18th of Brumaire, despite being a mix of force and deceit, was surprisingly accepted and even welcomed by the French people. Tired of the ongoing revolution, people were eager for stable and strong leadership. Any opposition, especially from Jacobin leaders in the regions, was quickly shut down, with 20 Jacobin deputies being sent into exile and others arrested. The group also created the short and unclear constitution of the year 8, notable for being the first post-revolution constitution to omit a declaration of rights. Napoleon cleverly finalized his power grab by ensuring the adoption of a constitution that positioned the first consul, himself inevitably, as the most powerful, with the authority to appoint the Senate, which would interpret the constitution to his advantage. This setup allowed him to govern without much opposition, diminishing the roles of the otherwise more independent Conseil d'État and Tribunal. This maneuver paved the way for the rise of the First French Empire. Regarding the legacy of these events, Karl Marx, in 1852, reflected on a later coup by Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III, against the Second Republic in his work, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. Marx saw Napoleon III as a less significant figure compared to his uncle, famously beginning his analysis with a quote that highlights how history repeats itself, first as a tragedy and then as a comedy. Marx credited Hegel with noting that historic events and figures reoccur, but Marx humorously added that Hegel forgot to mention the first occurrence is tragic and the second farcical. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.